Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Foundation. Vincent Romano stood in the mirror of his penthouse bathroom, adjusting his Italian silk tie. At 42, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built an empire from nothing. His reflection showed steel-gray eyes that had seen too much, and hands that bore the calluses of his youth spent in construction before he became one of Chicago's most successful real estate developers. The Romano name meant something in this city. Not old money, but earned respect. Vincent had started with a single duplex purchase at 25, using every penny of his inheritance from his immigrant grandfather. Now, 15 years later, he owned over 200 properties across the city, from luxury condos to commercial complexes. More importantly, he owned favors. Contractors, city officials, bank managers, lawyers, they all owed Vincent Romano something. "Dad, are you ready?" Sophie's voice carried through the bedroom. His daughter, the only person who could still make him smile without effort. At 16, she had inherited his determination, but tempered it with a warmth that reminded him why he'd built everything in the first place. "Almost there, princess," he called back, checking his watch. The party started in an hour, and despite spending $42,000 on what Amber called Sophie's dream Sweet 16, Vincent felt something was off. His wife had been distant for months, always on her phone, always finding reasons to leave the house. Amber Romano sat at her vanity, applying makeup with shaking hands. At 38, she still turned heads, but the guilt was eating her alive. The affair with Logan had started 6 months ago at the country club. He was everything Vincent wasn't: old money, refined, never had dirt under his fingernails. But as she watched her husband through the bathroom door, she felt the familiar pang of regret mixed with resentment. Vincent had given her everything money could buy, but he was always working, always building, always planning the next acquisition. Logan made her feel alive again, made her remember who she was before she became Mrs. Romano. The plan had been Logan's idea: to humiliate Vincent publicly at Sophie's party, to force a confrontation that would give Amber grounds for divorce. Logan had connections with the best lawyers in the state. What Amber didn't know was that Vincent had already noticed the changes. The late nights, the new clothes, the way she flinched when he touched her. He'd hired a private investigator 3 weeks ago, and the photos were sitting in his office safe. He was waiting for the right moment to act, but he'd never expected them to be bold enough to strike first. The Fairmont Hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed into a winter wonderland, complete with ice sculptures and enough white roses to stock a funeral home. Vincent had spared no expense because Sophie had asked for a fairy tale, and Vincent Romano never denied his daughter anything. As guests began arriving, Vincent noticed the subtle changes in the atmosphere. Amber's friends from the country club seemed to be avoiding eye contact, and there was an undercurrent of whispered conversations that stopped when he approached. Logan Fitzgerald had arrived early, ostensibly as a family friend, but Vincent caught the way his wife's eyes lit up when she saw him. Logan was exactly what Vincent had expected: tall, blonde, the kind of man who'd never worked a day in his life but somehow managed to live in a Lakeshore Drive mansion. His family owned a chain of upscale restaurants, and he spent his days playing golf and managing trust funds. The opposite of everything Vincent represented. Sophie was radiant in her white dress, unaware of the undercurrents of tension around her. She moved through the crowd like the princess Vincent had always told her she was, accepting gifts and compliments with genuine grace. Watching her, Vincent felt his resolve strengthen. Whatever was coming, he would protect his daughter from the fallout. The first sign of trouble came when Vincent approached a group of Amber's friends and heard them fall silent. "Ladies," he nodded politely, but Mrs. Henderson quickly excused herself, followed by the others. Even the catering staff seemed nervous around him, though they'd worked dozens of his events before. Vincent's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Webb, his private investigator. "Something's happening. Multiple witnesses being contacted. Be careful tonight." As the evening progressed, Vincent noticed Logan positioning himself near the main microphone, and Amber kept checking her watch. The pieces were falling into place, and Vincent realized he'd walked into an ambush. But Vincent Romano hadn't survived in Chicago real estate by backing down from fights. He moved through the crowd, his mind already working 3 steps ahead. If they wanted to play games at his daughter's party, they'd learn that Vincent Romano played by different rules. The foundation of their little conspiracy was about to crack, and when it did, Vincent would be ready to build something new from the wreckage. Chapter 2. The Humiliation. The moment came just as Sophie was about to cut her cake. Logan Fitzgerald stepped up to the microphone with the confidence of a man who'd never been denied anything in his life. The room fell silent as he tapped the microphone, and Vincent felt every eye in the room turn toward him. Ladies and gentlemen, Logan's voice carried the practiced smoothness of someone born to privilege. I'm afraid there's been a terrible mistake tonight. Vincent stepped forward, his instincts screaming danger, but Logan continued before he could speak. You see, this party was organized and paid for by the Fitzgerald family as a gift to Sophie, who will soon be my stepdaughter. Vincent Romano, unfortunately, is no longer welcome at this celebration. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Vincent felt the shift in the crowd, the way people stepped away from him as if he carried a disease. Amber moved to Logan's side, her face a mask of false regret. "Vincent," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent ballroom. "I filed for divorce yesterday. Logan and I, we're in love. We've been planning this for months. Sophie understands, and she's chosen to live with us." Vincent's eyes found his daughter across the room. Sophie's face was pale with shock, her mouth opening and closing as if she couldn't find words. This wasn't part of whatever plan she'd been told. "Dad," Sophie's voice was small, confused. "It's okay, princess," Vincent said quietly, his voice carrying despite not using the microphone. "Sometimes people show you who they really are." Logan stepped closer to the microphone, emboldened by the crowd's attention. "Security is on their way to escort you out, Romano. This is a private party paid for by my family. You're trespassing." Vincent looked around the room at faces he'd known for years. The mayor, whose campaign he'd funded. The bank president whose daughter's wedding he'd catered. Business partners who'd made millions through his deals. Not one of them met his eyes. "Vincent," Amber's voice had a sharp edge now. "Please don't make this harder than it has to be. Just leave." The security guard appeared at the ballroom entrance. Not hotel security, but private contractors Vincent didn't recognize. They were large men in expensive suits, and they moved with the confidence of people who'd been well paid to handle exactly this situation. "Sir," the lead guard approached Vincent, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." Vincent stood perfectly still for a moment, his mind processing everything. The coordination required for this level of humiliation. The guest list that had somehow excluded his friends while including Amber's allies. The security team that had been hired specifically for this moment. "You know what the funny thing is?" Vincent said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "I paid for all of this. Every flower, every piece of crystal, every bite of food you're eating. $42,000. Logan smirked. "And we appreciate your contribution to Sophie's happiness. Now if you could just—" "Dad, wait." Sophie broke free from the crowd, running toward him, but Amber caught her arm. "Sophie, honey, we talked about this," Amber said firmly. "This is for the best." Vincent looked at his daughter, seeing the confusion and pain in her eyes, and something cold settled in his chest. Sophie hadn't been part of this plan. She was as much a victim as he was. He walked toward the exit, the crowd parting before him like he was radioactive. As he reached the door, he heard Logan's voice behind him. "Oh, and Romano," Logan called out, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Don't bother coming around the house anymore. Amber's already changed the locks." Vincent paused at the doorway, his hand on the frame. When he turned back, his face was perfectly calm. "Enjoy the party," he said quietly. "Enjoy it while you can." The ride down in the elevator was the longest 2 minutes of Vincent's life. As the doors opened to the parking garage, his phone started buzzing. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails. Word was already spreading through Chicago's social circles. Vincent Romano had been publicly humiliated, thrown out of his own daughter's party, like a common beggar. He sat in his Bentley for a moment, hands steady on the steering wheel. Then he pulled out his phone and made his first call. "Marcus? It's Vincent. I need you to accelerate everything. And I need you to find out who else knew about tonight." His second call was to his lawyer. His third was to his accountant. By the time he reached his downtown office, Vincent Romano was no longer the man who'd been embarrassed at the Fairmont Hotel. He was something else entirely. The war had begun, and Vincent had never lost a war. Chapter 3: The Discovery. Vincent's office at 2 a.m. was illuminated only by the glow of multiple computer screens and the city lights beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. He'd spent the last 6 hours making calls, pulling files, and assembling a picture that was far worse than simple adultery. Marcus Webb entered without knocking, carrying a thick folder and wearing the grim expression of a man who'd uncovered something ugly. At 55, Marcus had spent 20 years as a Chicago PD detective before going private, and he'd worked with Vincent on everything from background checks to corporate espionage. "It's bad, Vincent," Marcus said, dropping the folder on the desk. "Worse than we thought." Vincent gestured to the chair across from his desk. "How bad?" "They've been planning this for 8 months, not 6. Logan approached Amber deliberately, targeted her at the country club after researching her assets. This wasn't a romantic affair that got out of hand. This was a calculated takedown. Marcus opened the folder, revealing photographs, financial records, and phone transcripts. Logan's in debt. Deep debt. His family's restaurant chain is hemorrhaging money, and he's personally leveraged to the tune of $12 million. His trust fund ran dry 2 years ago, and he's been living on credit and cocaine. Vincent studied the financial records. So he needs my money. Not just your money. Your properties. Your connections. Your entire network. Marcus pulled out a legal document. I managed to get a copy of the divorce papers Amber filed. She's claiming irreconcilable differences, but more importantly, she's claiming you've been abusive and that she fears for her safety. Vincent's jaw tightened, laying groundwork for a restraining order. Exactly. And with Illinois being a no-fault divorce state, she's positioned to claim half of everything you own. But here's the kicker. She's already moved most of her personal assets into offshore accounts. Logan's been advising her on asset protection for months. And Sophie. Marcus's expression darkened. Logan's been working on her too. Private conversations, gifts, promises about her future. He's been positioning himself as the sophisticated stepfather who can give her opportunities you can't. He even arranged for her to meet with a college admissions consultant who specializes in Ivy League schools. Vincent stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city he'd conquered piece by piece. They played this perfectly. Public humiliation to isolate me socially, divorce papers filed to protect their legal position, and they've been grooming my daughter to choose them over me. There's more, Marcus said quietly. I tracked Logan's movements over the past month. He's been meeting with some of your business rivals. David Kellerman, specifically. David Kellerman, Vincent's oldest competitor and the one man in Chicago who'd never forgiven Vincent for outbidding him on the Millennium Tower project 5 years ago. Kellerman had lost his shirt on that deal and had been looking for revenge ever since. They're not just taking my family, Vincent said, turning back to Marcus. They're trying to destroy my business. Kellerman's been feeding Logan information about your upcoming projects, your financing arrangements, even your bidding strategies. With Logan feeding that information to potential investors, they could systematically undercut your deals and redirect capital away from your projects. Vincent returned to his desk and opened his laptop. Show me everything. For the next 3 hours, Marcus laid out the full scope of the conspiracy. Phone records showing calls between Logan and Kellerman dating back 10 months. Financial records showing Amber had been moving money into hidden accounts. Photos of Logan meeting with Vincent's business partners, planting seeds of doubt about Vincent's stability and reliability. Most damaging of all were the recordings Marcus had obtained through less than legal means. Logan's voice, drunk and confident at a private party 2 weeks ago. Romano's finished. By the time we're done with him, he'll be lucky to keep a single property. The wife gets half in the divorce, and I've got Kellerman lined up to buy the rest at fire sale prices. Vincent closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. The betrayal was complete, not just personal, but professional. They hadn't just broken up his family. They tried to destroy everything he'd built. "What do you want me to do?" Marcus asked. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his mind working through possibilities. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured. "I want you to compile everything into 3 separate files. One for Amber, one for Logan, and one for Kellerman. Complete dossiers, finances, habits, weaknesses, fears, everything. And then we're going to teach them that Vincent Romano doesn't just play defense." Vincent stood and walked to his office safe, removing a small black notebook he'd kept for 15 years. "They want to destroy everything I've built? Fine. But when the smoke clears, I'll still be standing, and they'll have lost everything they ever cared about." Marcus had worked with Vincent long enough to recognize the tone. This wasn't anger or hurt pride. This was cold, calculated planning. "Vincent, what are you thinking?" Vincent smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm thinking about something my grandfather told me when I was 12 years old. He said, 'Vincenzo, in America, you can lose everything and start over. But some people, they don't deserve second chances.'" As the sun began to rise over Chicago, Vincent Romano began planning the systematic destruction of everyone who had betrayed him. And unlike his enemies, Vincent had never failed to complete a project once he'd started it. Chapter 4. The Architect of Ruin. Vincent spent the next week operating from his downtown office, like a general planning a military campaign. The conference room had been converted into a war room, with whiteboards covered in timelines, financial charts, and relationship maps. Marcus had brought in 2 additional investigators, and Vincent had retained the services of 3 different law firms, each handling separate aspects of what was to come. The first phase was information warfare. Vincent had spent 15 years building relationships throughout Chicago, and now he activated every one of them. A casual lunch with Councilman Rodriguez led to questions about Logan's family restaurant permits. A golf game with Bank President Morrison resulted in a quiet review of the Fitzgerald family's loan portfolio. A dinner with Judge Patricia Hawkins, purely social of course, happened to mention concerns about asset hiding in divorce proceedings. Vincent's approach was surgical. He never explicitly asked for favors or made direct accusations. Instead, he simply raised concerns and let his network draw their own conclusions. By the end of the week, Logan Fitzgerald found himself facing health department inspections at 3 restaurant locations, an IRS audit of his personal finances, and pointed questions from his creditors about his ability to service his debts. The second phase targeted Amber's social standing. Vincent knew his wife's greatest weakness was her need for acceptance among Chicago's elite. Through carefully placed conversations with the right people, word began to spread that Amber Romano was not the wronged wife she claimed to be, but rather a gold digger who'd abandoned her family for a trust fund baby with a drug problem. Mrs. Henderson, who'd snubbed Vincent at the party, suddenly found herself disinvited from the charity board meeting Amber had been counting on attending. The country club where Amber and Logan had met began questioning the Fitzgerald family's membership status due to financial irregularities. Even Amber's personal trainer, coincidentally, the brother of one of Vincent's construction foremen, became unavailable for future sessions. But Vincent's masterpiece was the third phase, the construction of their downfall. He learned something crucial from Marcus's investigation that neither Logan nor Amber knew he possessed. Logan's restaurant chain was indeed failing, but more importantly, Logan had been using falsified financial statements to secure additional loans. The documents were hidden in an offshore account that Logan thought was untraceable. Vincent's computer genius, a former hacker named Tommy who'd gone legitimate after Vincent had hired him instead of pressing charges, had managed to trace the digital trail. More importantly, Tommy had discovered that Logan was planning to use his marriage to Amber as collateral for one final, massive loan that would either save his empire or destroy them both. He's planning to leverage your real estate holdings as collateral, Tommy explained during a late-night meeting in Vincent's office. Once he's married to Amber and has legal access to her assets through the divorce settlement, He's going to pledge your properties against a $50 million loan from overseas investors. Vincent studied the documents. Investors who won't be particularly understanding if they can't collect. These aren't traditional lenders, Marcus added grimly. I ran background checks on the principals. They're connected to some very unforgiving people. So Logan's not just stealing my money, Vincent said slowly. He's planning to put my daughter at risk by involving criminals in our family business. The revelation shifted everything for Vincent. This was no longer about money or pride, or even revenge. This was about protecting Sophie from people who would use her as leverage if Logan's scheme went bad. Vincent picked up his phone and made a call to a number he hadn't used in 5 years. Leo, it's Vincent Romano. I need to ask a favor, and I need to ask it very carefully. Leo Torino answered on the second ring. Vincent's relationship with Chicago's unofficial power brokers had always been carefully maintained. He'd never asked for anything illegal, but he'd always been respectful and generous when their paths crossed. Now, that investment was about to pay dividends. Vincent, my friend, I heard you had some troubles. People are talking. People need to stop talking, Leo. And I need some advice about foreign investors who might be looking to establish relationships in Chicago. There was a pause. These investors, they wouldn't happen to be the kind who don't understand American bankruptcy law, would they? They might be exactly that kind, Leo. Then they might need some education about how business works in our city. Maybe they might decide Chicago isn't the right market for their investments. I would appreciate that education being thorough, Leo. Consider it done, my friend. And Vincent, next time someone disrespects you in public, you call me first. That kind of behavior is bad for the whole community. Vincent hung up knowing that Logan's criminal investors would soon receive a very clear message about the dangers of doing business with amateurs. But that was just the beginning. Over the next 3 days, Vincent executed the most complex real estate transaction of his career. Using a network of shell companies and offshore entities that even Tommy couldn't fully trace, Vincent began quietly purchasing every debt Logan Fitzgerald owed. Credit cards, personal loans, business obligations. Vincent bought them all at deeply discounted rates from lenders who were happy to get problem assets off their books. By Thursday morning, Vincent Romano owned Logan Fitzgerald's entire financial existence. Every dollar Logan owed, he now owed to Vincent, and unlike Logan's previous creditors, Vincent had no interest in workout plans or payment schedules. The final piece fell into place when Vincent learned that Amber had scheduled a meeting with her divorce attorney for Friday afternoon to finalize her asset declarations. She was planning to file an amended petition that would claim spousal support based on Vincent's income and assets while hiding her own offshore accounts. Vincent smiled as he made one final call. Judge Hawkins? It's Vincent Romano. I wanted to thank you for your advice about asset hiding in divorce cases. It turns out my concerns were completely justified. As Friday approached, Vincent felt the calm satisfaction of a job well done. Logan and Amber thought they were days away from destroying him. Instead, they were about to discover that Vincent Romano had built his empire by being smarter, more ruthless, and better connected than anyone who challenged him. The trap was set. Now all Vincent had to do was wait for them to spring it themselves. Chapter 5. The Trap Springs. Friday afternoon arrived with unseasonable warmth for October in Chicago. Vincent sat in his office, watching the clock tick toward 3 p.m., the exact moment when Amber would be sitting in her lawyer's office, signing papers that would trigger the final phase of his plan. At 2:45 p.m., Vincent's phone rang. Marcus. There in the building, Marcus reported from his surveillance position across from the law offices of Hartwell & Associates. Amber, Logan, and her attorney. They look confident. They should, Vincent replied. They have no idea what's coming. At exactly 3 p.m., Vincent's assistant buzzed his intercom. Mr. Romano, there's a process server here with documents for your review. Send him in. The young man handed Vincent a thick envelope with shaking hands. Word had already spread through the legal community about what was happening to Vincent Romano, and no one wanted to be associated with his downfall. Vincent tipped the server generously and sent him on his way. The divorce petition was exactly what Vincent had expected. Amber was claiming she'd been an abused wife, living in fear, contributing equally to the marriage's success. She was requesting half of all assets, full custody of Sophie, and monthly spousal support of $50,000. The petition painted Vincent as a controlling, possibly violent man who'd isolated his wife from her friends and family. Vincent set the papers aside and made his first call. "Judge Morrison, it's Vincent Romano. I have a small legal matter that might require your attention. It involves some concerning financial irregularities that my wife's attorney may not be aware of." Vincent's relationship with the family court system was about to be tested. Judge Morrison had been elected with significant support from Vincent's political network, and he owed his current position to votes that Vincent had influenced. More importantly, Judge Morrison was known for his strict stance on asset hiding and fraudulent financial declarations. "I'll be happy to review any documents you'd like to submit, Vincent," Judge Morrison said carefully. "And I want you to know that any concerns about domestic violence will be taken very seriously." "I appreciate that, Your Honor. I think you'll find the evidence quite illuminating." Vincent's second call was to Logan's creditors, the ones who'd sold Logan's debts to Vincent's shell companies. By 3:30 p.m., Logan Fitzgerald would receive simultaneous calls from 12 different collection agencies, all demanding immediate payment of his outstanding obligations. The total amount, $14.7 million. His third call was to the IRS investigator handling Logan's audit. Vincent had some additional information about Logan's offshore accounts that the investigator might find interesting. At 3:25 p.m., Vincent's phone lit up. The first call was from a number he didn't recognize. "Vincent," Amber's voice was tight with panic. "What the hell did you do?" "I'm not sure what you mean, Amber. I'm just sitting in my office, reading your very creative divorce petition. The FBI just walked in my lawyer's office. They have a warrant." Vincent looked out his window at the Chicago skyline. "The FBI? That sounds serious. What could they possibly want with you? Don't play games with me. I know you're behind this." "Amber, I'm genuinely confused. Are you saying you've done something that would interest federal investigators?" The line went dead. Vincent's phone immediately rang again. This time it was Logan. "Romano, you piece of shit. What did you do?" "Logan," Vincent said pleasantly. "How nice to hear from you. How was Amber's meeting with her lawyer?" "You know damn well how it went. The Fed seized all her financial records, and I just got calls from every bank I owe money to." "That does sound stressful," Vincent agreed. "Although I have to ask, why would you owe money to banks? I thought your family was wealthy." "You bought my debts," Logan snarled. "I know it was you. That's an interesting theory. But even if someone had purchased your debts, that would only matter if you'd been hiding assets or lying about your ability to pay. You haven't been doing anything like that, have you, Logan?" Vincent could hear Logan's breathing getting heavier. "This isn't over, Romano. Actually, Logan, I think it is. You see, when someone tries to destroy me, I don't just defend myself. I make sure they can never try again." Vincent hung up and turned to his computer. Tommy had prepared a special surprise for Logan and Amber. A comprehensive dossier of their affair, their financial crimes, and their conspiracy against Vincent. The dossier was being delivered simultaneously to the FBI, the IRS, the Chicago Police Department, and every major media outlet in the city. But the real beauty of Vincent's plan wasn't the legal consequences. It was the social and financial destruction that would follow. Logan's restaurant chain would be toxic to potential buyers once his criminal activities became public. Amber's offshore accounts would be frozen pending investigation, leaving her with no access to the money she'd hidden. And their social circle would abandon them the moment their names appeared in the newspapers. At 4 p.m., Vincent received the call he'd been waiting for. "Dad," Sophie's voice was small and scared. "Can you come get me? Mom and Logan are fighting, and there are FBI agents here. I don't understand what's happening." "I'm on my way, princess. Pack whatever you need. You're coming home." Vincent left his office with the satisfaction of a job perfectly executed. Logan and Amber had thought they were playing chess, but Vincent had been playing a completely different game. They'd moved pieces around a board while Vincent had been systematically destroying the board itself. By evening, Logan Fitzgerald will be facing federal charges for bank fraud and tax evasion. Amber Romano would be under investigation for money laundering and perjury, and Vincent would have his daughter back, along with every penny they'd tried to steal. But Vincent wasn't finished yet. He'd promised them they would lose everything they cared about. And Vincent Romano always kept his promises. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. By Saturday morning, the story had exploded across Chicago's media landscape. Socialite wife and lover accused of massive fraud screamed the Tribune's headline, while the Sun-Times went with Romano marriage scandal rocks Chicago elite. Vincent's phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn, but he ignored every call except the ones that mattered. Sophie was safe in the penthouse, still processing everything that had happened. Vincent had spent the evening explaining as much as he could without devastating her entirely. She was old enough to understand that her mother had made terrible choices, but young enough to still hope for some kind of reconciliation. Vincent didn't have the heart to tell her that reconciliation was impossible. Marcus arrived at 8 a.m. with the morning reports. Logan's been arrested, he announced without preamble. Federal marshals picked him up at his Lakeshore condo around midnight. They found 2 kilos of cocaine, which explains where a lot of his money went. Vincent poured coffee for both of them. And Amber, still in FBI custody. They're holding her on suspicion of money laundering and fraud. Apparently, her offshore accounts contain more than just hidden marital assets. She'd been helping Logan move drug money through legitimate businesses. Vincent felt something cold settle in his stomach. Drug money. Logan wasn't just addicted to cocaine, he was dealing it. High-end stuff, celebrity clients, very exclusive. Amber's been washing the profits through real estate purchases for the past year. The revelation hit Vincent like a physical blow. His wife hadn't just betrayed him. She'd put their daughter at risk by involving their family in drug trafficking. Sophie could have been arrested, charged as an accessory, destroyed before her life had even begun. There's more, Marcus continued grimly. The FBI found communications between Logan and David Kellerman. Kellerman wasn't just trying to steal your business deals. He was planning to use your properties as distribution centers for Logan's operation. Vincent set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. They were going to turn my buildings into drug warehouses. It gets worse. I talked to my contact at the DEA. Logan's suppliers are the same overseas investors who are going to fund his expansion. They're not traditional criminals. They're part of an international organization that uses legitimate businesses as fronts. If Logan's plan had worked, your entire real estate empire would have become a money laundering operation. Vincent walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Every building in his line of sight represented years of work, thousands of honest jobs, families who depended on him. Amber and Logan hadn't just tried to steal his money. They'd try to destroy everything legitimate he'd built and replace it with something poisonous. What's the timeline for prosecution? Vincent asked. Federal charges move fast when they have this much evidence. Logan's looking at 15 to 20 years minimum. Amber could get 10 to 12 if she cooperates. But given the amount of money involved and the drug connections, she might not have anything valuable to trade. Vincent's phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. Amber's attorney wants to meet. Claims she has information about other victims. She wants to make a deal, Vincent said, showing Marcus the text. Are you going to take the meeting? Vincent was quiet for a long moment. Set it up, but not because I'm interested in dealing with her. I want to hear what she has to say while she still thinks she has leverage. The meeting was arranged for that afternoon at Vincent's lawyer's office. Amber arrived in handcuffs, flanked by federal marshals and her attorney. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past 24 hours. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and her eyes held the desperate look of someone who'd finally realized the true scope of her situation. Vincent, she said as soon as she saw him. Thank God. We need to talk. Mrs. Romano, Vincent's lawyer, Frank Sullivan, interrupted formally. You're here because your attorney indicated you have information relevant to other criminal activities. Mr. Romano is here as a potential victim, not as someone interested in negotiation. Amber's lawyer, a nervous man named Peterson, cleared his throat. My client is prepared to provide information about David Kellerman's involvement in this conspiracy, as well as details about other real estate developers who may have been targeted by the same criminal organization. Vincent leaned back in his chair. I'm listening. There are 3 other developers in Chicago who've been targeted, Amber said quickly. Logan's been running the same con on them. Identify wealthy men with beautiful wives, seduce the wives, use the divorces to access the husband's assets for money laundering. We weren't the first, Vincent. We weren't even the second. Names, Vincent said coldly. Richard Hawthorne, Michael Chun, and Gary Westbrook. Logan's been operating this scheme for 2 years. The overseas investors have been using Chicago real estate to wash money from drug operations in Mexico and Colombia. Vincent knew all 3 names. Hawthorne had committed suicide 6 months ago after losing everything in a messy divorce. Chun had disappeared, and rumors suggested he'd fled the country. Westbrook was still fighting his divorce, but his wife had already cleaned out their accounts. How many properties are we talking about? Frank asked. Over $1 billion in real estate across the city, Amber replied. Vincent, they were going to use your network as the centerpiece of the entire operation. Your reputation, your connections, your legitimacy. It would have given them access to every major development project in Chicago. Vincent felt the full weight of what had almost happened. And Sophie, Amber's face crumpled. Logan said she'd never have to know. He said we'd send her to boarding school in Switzerland, keep her away from everything. But I know now that was a lie. They would have used her too, Vincent, as leverage, as cover, as whatever they needed. Vincent stood up. Frank, what does the prosecution need from Mrs. Romano to ensure maximum sentences for everyone involved? Complete cooperation. Names, dates, financial records, communication logs. Everything she knows about the entire network. Vincent looked at Amber for a long moment. She was still his daughter's mother, still the woman he'd once loved. But she'd made choices that could have destroyed not just him, but Sophie and dozens of other innocent families. Cooperate fully, he told her. Tell them everything. And maybe when you get out of prison in 10 years, Sophie will still remember who you used to be before you became this. Amber started crying, but Vincent was already walking toward the door. He'd heard enough. As they left the meeting, Marcus asked, What's next? Vincent pulled out his phone and made a call. Kellerman? It's Vincent Romano. We need to talk. Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. David Kellerman's Millennium Club office occupied the top floor of a building Vincent had tried to buy 3 times over the past decade. At 62, Kellerman was old Chicago money, the kind of man who believed success was something you inherited rather than earned. His hatred for Vincent went beyond business rivalry. It was the contempt of someone who thought Vincent didn't belong in their world. The meeting was set for Sunday evening, neutral ground in Kellerman's view. Vincent arrived alone, despite Marcus's concerns about safety. Some conversations required privacy, and Vincent suspected this would be their last face-to-face encounter for a very long time. Kellerman was waiting in his office, a glass of scotch in his hand, and another poured for Vincent. The older man looked remarkably calm for someone whose criminal conspiracy had just been exposed to federal investigators. Vincent, Kellerman nodded toward the chair across from his desk. I assume you're here to gloat. I'm here to understand, Vincent replied, ignoring the offered drink. You had everything, David. Money, reputation, connections. Why throw it all away to hurt me? Kellerman smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You really don't understand, do you? You think this was about money or business deals. You're missing the bigger picture entirely. Then explain it to me. Kellerman stood and walked to his office window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. My family built this city, Vincent. My great-grandfather laid the first rail lines. My grandfather constructed half the buildings downtown. My father shaped the political landscape that made modern Chicago possible. And you've run it all into the ground, Vincent observed. Because of people like you. Kellerman turned, his face flushed with anger. You come here with your working-class background and your immigrant grandfather, and you think you could just take what my family spent generations building. You buy buildings, influence politicians, shape the city's future like you have some kind of right to it. Vincent leaned back in his chair. So this was about keeping me in my place. This was about restoring the natural order. Logan came to me 18 months ago with a proposition. Use your wife to destroy you from the inside while I systematically undermined your business relationships. It was elegant, really. You'd lose everything personal and professional, and the pieces would fall back to people who actually deserve them. People like you and Logan. People with breeding. People who understand that some positions in society are earned through heritage, not just ambition. Kellerman returned to his desk. Logan's failure was getting involved with criminals. That was never part of my plan. Vincent studied Kellerman's face. But you knew about the drugs. For the first time, Kellerman's composure cracked slightly. I knew Logan had expensive habits. I didn't realize the extent of his operations until it was too late to extract myself cleanly. So, when the federal investigation started, you decided to let Logan and Amber take the fall while you disappeared quietly into retirement. Something like that, Kellerman admitted. My attorneys have already negotiated immunity in exchange for cooperation. I'll testify against Logan and provide evidence about the money laundering, but I won't face any charges myself. Vincent felt a familiar cold anger settling in his chest. You destroyed 3 families before mine, David. Hawthorne killed himself because of what you and Logan did to him. Chun lost his children in the custody battle and fled the country. Westbrook is fighting for his life in divorce court. Casualties of war, Kellerman said dismissively. Besides, they were all nouveau riche anyway. Social climbers who'd gotten too big for their positions. Vincent stood up slowly. And what about Sophie? What was your plan for my daughter? Sophie would have been fine. Logan was actually quite fond of her. She would have had opportunities, education, access to the right social circles. Under proper guidance, she could have become quite suitable for our community. Your community, Vincent repeated. The one that includes drug dealers and money launderers. Kellerman waved his hand dismissively. Logan's extracurricular activities were regrettable, but they don't define the broader principle. Chicago needs to be run by people who understand its traditions, its history, its proper social structure. Vincent walked to Kellerman's desk and placed both hands on the surface, leaning forward. You're right about one thing, David. Chicago does need to be run by people who understand it. But you don't understand this city at all. I've lived here my entire life. You've existed here your entire life, Vincent interrupted. You've never built anything, never created jobs, never made anyone's life better. You've just inherited and consumed and complained. Chicago isn't about bloodlines or heritage or knowing the right people at the right clubs. It's about work. It's about making something from nothing. It's about earning what you have. Kellerman's face reddened. You think your success makes you better than me? You think building low-income housing and strip malls give you the right to lecture me about this city? Vincent straightened up. I think protecting my daughter from people like you gives me the right to do whatever I want to people like you. For the first time, Kellerman looked uncertain. What are you talking about? Vincent pulled out his phone and showed Kellerman a series of photographs. Remember when you said you negotiated immunity? That was based on the federal investigators believing you were a minor player who got in over his head. But these photos show you meeting with Logan suppliers 6 months ago, planning the expansion of their operation into Chicago real estate. Kellerman's face went pale. Where did you get those? I've had investigators following Logan for months, David. I know about every meeting, every phone call, every financial transaction, including the ones where you personally arrange for drug money to be invested in specific properties throughout the city. That's impossible. I was careful. You were careless and greedy and stupid enough to think you could destroy my family without consequences. Vincent put his phone away. Your immunity deal was contingent on full disclosure and cooperation. But you lied to federal investigators about the extent of your involvement. That's a felony. Kellerman stood up quickly, knocking over his chair. You can't prove any of this. I don't have to prove it, David. I just have to provide it to the right people and let them draw their own conclusions. Vincent moved toward the door. By tomorrow morning, the FBI will have everything I know about your involvement in this conspiracy. Your immunity deal will be revoked, and you'll be facing the same charges as Logan. Wait, Kellerman called desperately. We can work something out. I have information about other criminal operations in the city. I can be valuable to you. Vincent paused at the door. You know what would be valuable to me, David? If people like you learned that there are consequences for hurting innocent families. If people like you understood that Chicago belongs to everyone who's willing to work for it, not just the people who happen to be born into the right families. Vincent, please. I'm 62 years old. A federal conviction would be a death sentence. Vincent looked back at Kellerman one last time. You should have thought about that before you decided to target my daughter. As Vincent left the Millennium Club, he felt a sense of completion he hadn't experienced since the night of Sophie's party. Kellerman would face justice. Logan was already in federal custody. Amber would spend the next decade in prison. And Sophie was safe. But as he drove through the city streets toward home, Vincent realized that his victory felt hollow. He'd won the war, but the cost had been everything he'd spent 15 years building. His marriage, his trust in other people, his belief that success and hard work were enough to protect the people he loved. Tomorrow, he'd start rebuilding. But tonight, he just wanted to go home to his daughter and remember what he'd been fighting for all along. Chapter 8. The Price of Victory. 2 months later, Vincent stood in the federal courthouse as Logan Fitzgerald was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The judge's words echoed through the packed courtroom. The defendant's crimes represent not just financial fraud, but a systematic effort to corrupt legitimate businesses and endanger innocent families. Logan had aged dramatically during his time in custody. The confident, privileged man who'd humiliated Vincent at Sophie's party was gone, replaced by someone hollow-eyed and broken. When Logan's eyes met Vincent's across the courtroom, there was no anger or defiance, just the recognition of complete defeat. Amber's sentencing had been the previous week. 12 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for 8 years. She tried to speak to Vincent afterward, to ask about Sophie, but Vincent had walked away without a word. Some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. David Kellerman's fall had been the most spectacular. The man who'd claimed immunity became the prosecution's most valuable target once his true level of involvement was revealed. Facing life in prison, he'd attempted suicide in his cell 3 weeks after his arrest. He survived, but the experience had broken him completely. His trial was scheduled for next month, but everyone expected him to plead guilty and accept whatever deal the prosecutors offered. Vincent's empire had not only survived the assault, but had emerged stronger. The federal investigation had cleared him of any wrongdoing, and his cooperation with law enforcement had earned him respect throughout the city. 3 major development projects that had been stalled for months suddenly moved forward once Kellerman's sabotage was removed from the equation. But victory had come with costs that Vincent was still calculating. Sophie had moved back into the penthouse, but their relationship remained fragile. She was seeing a therapist twice a week, trying to process the reality that her mother was a criminal and her stepfather-to-be had been using her family for money laundering. Some days, she seemed like the confident young woman Vincent remembered. Other days, she barely spoke to him at all. "Dad!" Sophie knocked on his office door late one Thursday evening. "Can we talk?" Vincent looked up from the contracts he'd been reviewing. Sophie stood in the doorway, wearing one of his old construction company t-shirts, looking younger than her 16 years. "Of course, Princess. What's on your mind?" Sophie settled into the chair across from his desk, the same chair where Marcus had delivered evidence of the conspiracy, where Vincent had planned his revenge, where dozens of crucial decisions had been made over the past few months. "I've been thinking about what happened," she said carefully. "About Mom, about Logan, about everything." Vincent set down his pen and gave her his full attention. "What about it? I understand why you did what you did. I understand that they were criminals and that you had to protect us. But," she paused, searching for words, "sometimes I wonder if there could have been another way." Vincent had been dreading this conversation. What kind of other way? I don't know. Maybe if you confronted Mom before everything got so bad. Maybe if you tried to get her help instead of destroying her. Vincent leaned back in his chair. "Sophie, your mother made choices that put you in danger. She was helping drug dealers use our family as a cover for criminal activities. If I hadn't stopped them, you could have been arrested, charged as an accessory, sent to prison yourself." "I know that," Sophie said quietly. and I'm grateful you protected me. But she's still my mom, and now she's gone for 12 years. By the time she gets out, I'll be 28 years old. I'll probably have kids of my own that she'll never know. Vincent felt the familiar weight of difficult decisions. Would you rather I had let her destroy our family? No, Sophie said immediately. But I wish there had been a way to save her instead of just punishing her. Vincent was quiet for a long moment. Do you think she wanted to be saved? Sophie considered this. I think she was scared and confused and made terrible choices. But I think if you'd given her a chance to choose differently, she might have taken it. She had months to choose differently, Sophie. Every day she spent with Logan, every lie she told, every dollar she helped him steal. Those were all choices. But she didn't know how bad it was going to get, Sophie insisted. She thought it was just an affair and a divorce. She didn't understand about the drugs and the money laundering until it was too late. Vincent studied his daughter's face, seeing both his own determination and something else, a capacity for forgiveness that he'd lost somewhere along the way. You're probably right, he admitted. If I'd handled things differently, maybe your mother would be getting help instead of serving a prison sentence. But I can't change what happened, Sophie. I can only make sure it never happens again. Sophie nodded. I know, and I don't blame you for protecting us. She trailed off. You just wish your father wasn't the kind of man who destroys people when they hurt him. I wish you were the kind of man who could forgive people when they hurt him, Sophie corrected gently. Vincent felt something twist in his chest. Forgiveness is a luxury I can't afford, princess. The world is full of people who will take advantage of mercy, who see kindness as weakness. If I forgive the people who hurt our family, it just encourages others to try the same thing. But what if forgiveness isn't about them? Sophie asked. What if it's about you? About not carrying all that anger around forever? Vincent looked at his daughter and saw a wisdom that he'd never possessed at her age. Maybe that was the difference between them. She'd inherited his strength, but not his coldness, his determination, but not his ruthlessness. I'll think about what you said, he promised. Sophie smiled for the first time in weeks. That's all I can ask. After she left, Vincent sat alone in his office, surrounded by the evidence of his victory. Every enemy had been defeated, every threat neutralized, every score settled. But as he looked out at the city lights below, he realized that Sophie was right about one thing. He was carrying a weight that went beyond protecting his family. He was carrying the need to never be vulnerable again, never trust again, never risk being hurt again. And that weight was changing him into someone he wasn't sure he wanted to be. Chapter 9. New Foundations. 1 year after the trials, Vincent stood in the construction site of his newest project, a community center in the same neighborhood where his grandfather had first settled in Chicago. The building would house job training programs, after-school care for working families, and small business incubation services. It wasn't the most profitable use of the land, but it felt like the right one. Sophie was with him, wearing work boots and a hard hat, looking every inch the heir to his empire. At 17, she developed an interest in urban planning and sustainable development that impressed even Vincent's most experienced architects. She'd also developed an independent streak that reminded him daily that she was her own person, not just his daughter. The South Wing is going to be beautiful, Sophie said, reviewing the latest blueprints. I love how you've designed the community meeting spaces to flow into the outdoor areas. It was your suggestion, Vincent reminded her. You said people needed spaces where they could gather naturally, not just formal meeting rooms. Sophie grinned. I have good ideas sometimes. Sometimes, Vincent agreed, though they both knew her ideas had shaped every aspect of the project. Marcus approached them across the construction site, carrying a folder that Vincent recognized. Monthly updates on the people they destroyed. Vincent had asked for them initially to ensure his enemies weren't planning comebacks, but lately he'd been questioning why he still needed to know. Updates, Marcus asked. Vincent took the folder but didn't open it. Just tell me the basics. Logan's been transferred to a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania. Model prisoner, apparently. Teaching literacy classes to other inmates. He's eligible for his first parole hearing in 18 years. And Amber, still at the Federal Women's Facility in Ohio. She's earned her GED and started working toward a bachelor's degree in social work. Clean disciplinary record. Sophie's letter seemed to mean a lot to her. Vincent glanced at his daughter, who was studiously examining the blueprints and pretending not to listen. Sophie had been writing to her mother for 6 months, despite Vincent's initial objections. The letters seemed to help Sophie process her feelings about what had happened. Kellerman. Marcus hesitated. Died by suicide 3 months ago. Prison officials said he'd been struggling with depression since his sentencing. Vincent felt an unexpected punch of regret. He'd wanted Kellerman to face consequences for his actions, but he'd never wanted him dead. Another weight to add to the collection. That's enough for today, Vincent said, handing the folder back to Marcus unopened. I don't need monthly updates anymore. Marcus looked surprised. You sure? I can keep monitoring the situation if... I'm sure. What's done is done. Knowing more details won't change anything. After Marcus left, Vincent and Sophie continued their tour of the construction site. They walked through spaces that would soon house programs designed to give people second chances, fresh starts, opportunities to build something better. Dad, Sophie said as they climbed to what would become the building's observation deck. Can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret how everything happened? Vincent considered the question carefully. I regret that it had to happen at all. I regret that your mother made choices that put you at risk. I regret that you had to see the ugly side of human nature so young. But do you regret how you handled it? I regret that there wasn't a better way to protect you, Vincent said honestly. But I can't regret protecting you. Sophie nodded. I've been thinking about that a lot. About protection and punishment and forgiveness and all of it. And what have you concluded? I think maybe they don't have to be opposites, Sophie said slowly. I think maybe you can protect people and still believe in second chances. I think maybe being strong enough to forgive someone is different from being weak enough to let them hurt you again. Vincent looked out over the neighborhood below, working families, small businesses, people trying to build better lives for their children. His grandfather had been one of those people once, arriving with nothing but hope and determination. Your mother writes that she wants to work with families affected by drug addiction when she gets out, Sophie continued. She says what happened to our family helps her understand how addiction and crime destroy innocent people. Do you believe her? I think I want to, Sophie admitted. I think I want to believe that people can change, that mistakes don't have to define someone forever, that even terrible choices can lead to better ones eventually. Vincent put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. You know what I think? What? I think you're going to be a better person than I am. You're going to build things that last longer than buildings or business deals. You're going to help people in ways I never learned how to. Sophie leaned against him. I learned everything important from you, Dad, including the strength to forgive people when they deserve it. As they stood together on the construction site, Vincent realized that his greatest victory hadn't been destroying his enemies. It had been raising a daughter who could see possibilities for redemption even in the darkest situations. Sophie had inherited his determination and his intelligence, but she'd also developed something he'd lost along the way, the ability to believe in people's capacity to change. Maybe that was enough. Maybe building something good was more important than punishing everything bad. Maybe the best revenge against people who tried to destroy his family was raising a daughter who would spend her life helping families stay together. Vincent Romano had won his war, but more importantly, he discovered that the most meaningful victories weren't about defeating enemies. They were about protecting the people who made life worth living. As construction crews worked around them, building something that would serve the community for generations, Vincent felt a satisfaction deeper than any business success he'd ever achieved. He'd build an empire, but Sophie would build something better, a legacy of compassion that could heal the wounds that revenge had left behind. The war was over. Now it was time to build peace. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.